Right.
Uh,
So, go ahead, take it away.
okay, so I spent just like 15 seconds in my head coming up with an agenda. Um, um,
Well, that was over planning.
right. I guess probably I should introduce myself first and talk about my background,
Yeah, that
I
sounds
guess, and then we can cover whatever else you want to cover. Um, so uh, I mean, I don't know how much you all know about me already. I got a PhD in educational technology / learning sciences at University of Washington. My voice is going out a little bit, so I apologize for that. Um, in 2010 is when I got the degree. My book came out in 2012, which is basically a rewrite of my dissertation. And during those 2 years, I was also a postdoc after I graduated, also at UW, working with Zoran Popovic. He's in computer science. His team did the Fold It, that protein folding game, and they're now doing math fractions games, funded by DARPA mostly, DARPA and Gates. So I was a postdoc with them for a couple of years, and then after that, I've been adjuncting for 2 years at UW, but then also on, in online programs wherever. One of them being Pepperdine University, which has recently hired me to start a new position as the director for a new gameful design lab, is what it's called. It's a new lab that focuses on increasing gaming literacy among actually, originally we were trying to target undergrads, but it sort of spread into K-12 space as well. But right before this call, I was telling Hannah that the sort of main project we're working on this year is a game jam for homeless youth in the LA area. But we also are helping faculty at Pepperdine like increase engagement in their courses by introducing game-like elements or game mechanics in their course design, and trying to deliberately not use the word gamification. And what else? So I mean, that's me, I guess. Before graduate school, I used to be a game designer for the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry in Portland. I also went to graduate school basically for an instructional design degree, because I felt like no one at OMSI, well, like we knew what we were doing, but we didn't have any academic literature to back up what we were doing. And all the stuff that I did for them was sort of based off of my just intrinsic knowledge, I guess, or lived knowledge of what games are and how games should be designed. And so I went to graduate school because I was like, well, there's got to be stuff out there that says how we should be doing this from a learning perspective, and that's where I started learning things like cognitive load theory and things like that, right? But then once I was in graduate school, I was introduced to all this stuff about like digital literacies and new media, and new literacy studies and learning theories and all this stuff. And then also Jim G and a whole bunch of other people were starting to write about games and education. And that's when I decided to switch over to a PhD program and do an ethnography of gamers, mostly because I felt like a bunch of people were starting to write about games without really knowing what they were talking about, or without actually understanding what's going on in the life of gamers. And for the last 20 or 30 years, that's led to all sorts of issues that we have with educational software being really crapware. So that's probably enough, right? Everyone's muted.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was talking and it was muted. I was like, I'm mute, I'm mute. No, that's good. I mean, definitely, if you want to talk a little bit about the game jam or whatever before you, I think that's fascinating. I think both Gloria and Jared will find that interesting. But if you want to start talking about Leet Noobs too, I mean, definitely this isn't as informal as we want to make it because it'll be a small informal group. So.
Yeah. Well, the game jam. I mean, so I've been at Pepperdine for like about 7 weeks now, I guess. I started in first week of September. although for 3 weeks I was kind of doing conferences and stuff like that. So it feels like it's only been a month or so. And what I've learned about LA is that any other place in the US, and it would be called like 5 or 6 different cities. Um, like if you go to the Bay Area, San Francisco is San Francisco, Oakland is Oakland, Berkeley is Berkeley, right? Over here, everything is LA. And so then it's broken up into like West LA and South LA and like, downtown and all this stuff is like, and then all those sections have their own little neighborhoods, which in any other city would be neighborhoods. And so LA has like this middle layer, like West LA, right? Or it's just crazy. So what that means is, maybe unsurprisingly, is that there's a whole bunch of institutions in LA that aren't really coordinating with each other. I don't feel like they know each other exist, and this is probably just a testament to academia in general. I mean, this happens on campus, right? Is that departments that talk to each other, but I feel like there's a bunch of different game labs and institutions in LA that aren't really, I don't know, they don't really talk to each other. And so part of what I'm trying to do is bridge that. And I'm going and meeting with all these different people. I haven't met with UCLA yet, but I've been meeting with USC, and I have some meetings set up with UCI and all these different places that have game labs. And I'm just trying to drum up support for this game jam idea that I have. So what I want to be doing with Pepperdine, and actually as a consortium with a whole bunch of other institutions, is run a game jam for homeless youth. It originally started as underserved youth in the LA area, but the main premise is that if you study and play games, if you make games, then you start to develop really good processes for systems thinking, and you're able to deconstruct interconnected systems and critique them. And who needs that more than people who are screwed by our systems? And so that's why we're targeting homeless youth. But then also we want to just provide a vehicle for self-expression and narrative voice. I kind of feel like if we do twine games, I don't know if you all know what twine games are, but there's these like choose your own adventure HTML games. It's all text-based, and you just read a passage and then you make a selection. But most of the twine games that have been coming out are deeply personal and very meaningful to the people who've been making them, and sort of like really, really emotionally charged, and like vehicles for empathy, basically. So I was thinking, well, let's get some homeless kids to make some twine games and see what happens. Maybe something amazing will happen. And if only one of them makes something amazing, that might be enough, That's basically what I'm doing these days. It's so far removed from the work that I did for that book, right? It's like completely different.
I think that's how it happens, though, with academic research. It's like you're here, but then all of a sudden, it's the way it works.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I never really, I didn't even know what ethnography was before I was a grad student. Um, and it was like, I kind of feel like I have to do this because no one knows what they're talking about. And then, oh, it's called ethnography? Okay. you know? Um, yeah, that book is like, it took me, I started in 2005 is when I started data collection. So the book came out in 2012, and so it's like a 7-year endeavor, um, which is quite a huge chunk of my life, actually. But if you have questions on the book, then please feel free to ask.
Gloria, Jared, you have any questions, burning questions about method or ethical, how gaining entry, which obviously it was easy for him in that sense, but for your own ideas and your own studies?
I guess I'm interested in method. I haven't finished, but I did watch your dissertation defense on YouTube, and I'm kind of interested in how you got from the process of writing to that defense, which, at least from what I've seen, seemed fairly non-traditional in the things that you shared, I guess. So maybe the process of the defense, since it's all sort of related to the same topic.
Yeah. So I mean, um, a part of it is I think I'm trying to be consistent in how I approach academic work, and um, when I was writing the dissertation, I had in mind that I wanted it to be a book. And so I tried to keep the language a little bit more informal than probably is usual for most dissertations. And then when sort of like, I don't know, as I became more and more mature as a grad student, it became clearer and clearer to me that a lot of the traditional ways that academia is done is just not is contradictory to its sort of stated goals, right? So I think to me, academia is about the sharing of ideas, and it's also serving the public in some way. I think we have a moral obligation to be public intellectuals, and so it just made sense to put my dissertation defense on YouTube, to make it as open as possible, to start a blog and start writing on the blog. Early versions of some of the chapters in the book were on my blog first. And when I was doing the defense, I was like, well, like, who am I actually speaking for? So it's kind of weird because most dissertation defenses, right? You just need to present it to your 4 or 5 people who are in your committee and get them to pass you. For me, I felt like it was I had a really good committee. Like, I trusted them I trusted that they wouldn't let me even set a defense date without them feeling like I was ready. And so I took advantage of that trust, I guess, and just went, okay, well, I'm not going to do this for them. I'm going to do it for some general public then. And um, and then when that was decided, I basically had to, I mean, I don't know if this is clear, but I tried to do a really good job of explaining what this game is like to people who don't play, And then I also, at the same time, try to explain all these sort of learning things as much as possible to like, I pretend my mom's in the audience, It's like, what would she need to know in order to understand what I'm talking about? Um, um, and there's language barriers too, but we won't go there. But so I don't know. Maybe if I'm hoping that's what you're talking about when you say that it wasn't traditional, because that's what I was hoping was.
Yeah, I mean, it felt very much like you were talking beyond the committee, like to other people, and just the way you integrated the scenes and the videos, the screen captures from the actual gameplay were the kinds of things that struck me as non-traditional, but very helpful for me to understand what it was you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, part of it when I was writing the disc, especially the chapter on communication and coordination, like the very first publication I ever had. When I was writing that, I was sort of stuck in with all those people still, all those players. I mean, still. And so as I was writing, I was like, okay, I'm writing this for them. In the back of my head, I'm imagining them like reading over my shoulder, making sure that what I'm saying is on point, and that they would agree with what I'm saying, and making sure that they would be able to understand what I'm writing about, because it really mattered to me that whatever I found was helpful to them. In terms of that, if that actually happened, I think maybe only 3 of them actually ended up reading anything I wrote. But I guess that imagined audience got it to where it was, or where it became. And then it was just very helpful once it was in that state already to make it into a book, because then I didn't actually have to do that much work. You sort of remove all your APA references and all that crap and try to get rid of footnotes and stuff like that. But other than that, it was relatively easy, except for the fact that I sort of converted the whole thing into second person, or first person and second person. So that took some time to make sure all my verb tenses were right and everything, or noun verb matches and stuff. And then I also took a cue from Extra Lives. That was called Tom Bissell's book.
Extra Lives, yeah.
Yeah. That book is amazing. If you haven't read it, it's written in such a refreshing voice and I read that right before I started converting my dissertation into a book. And so, and I would like to think that a lot of his voice comes out as my voice, And I was looking for it now. It has a blue cover.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. Let me see if I can grab it. Keep talking.
He's the guy who wrote he had an article, I forgot what it was in, New York Times or something like that, where he was talking about his cocaine addiction while playing Grand Theft Auto in Thailand, and that then became a chapter in his book. Yeah, it's just so like non-ashamedly open about his various what society would call addictions. I don't know.
You mentioned that you posted part of, as you were writing, you posted on the blog, and was that to get, sort of the participants' feedback as you wrote, or just to share with them so that you could show them too that you were writing for them as well?
The blog was actually more for other graduate students. I felt like I didn't feel like I had much mentoring, I guess, or peer mentoring, especially from other grad students as I was starting, and I felt like there were a whole bunch of things about academic life that you kind of have to learn on your own unless you have one of these mentors. I mean, just really simple things like conferences are hella important, but because conferences are really important, you immediately have this class issue where some people just can't afford them, or you have. I went to an R1 institution where we had research groups that had grant money, and so I had travel, money and stuff like that, which is just a huge privilege. But before I joined a research group, for like 3 or 4 years, I wasn't in a research group, and I just felt like, well, what's going on here? It's totally unfair, and yet we have this thing called the web. Like, why aren't we sharing more with each other? Why do we depend on conferences when we could just email each other or start Google Hangouts or whatever, right? Although Google Hangouts didn't exist yet. And so part of the reason why I put my early drafts on the blog was just like, okay, I want to make this as transparent as possible. It's also just, I think a lot of people, and this is totally rational, a lot of people have a fear of putting their early work up, a fear of sharing, because it's such an intellectual economy that we live in academia, and fronting intelligence is one of the things that happens. But I'm continually sort of convinced that if you let go of those fears and treat it as more of like if you take a design studio approach to academic life, when you do game design, for me, iteration is king, and throwing out ideas, getting them shot down, seeing that they don't work, and revising them is necessary. So you want to do that as fast as possible. And so I've started to treat my writing the same. And actually, it's sort of unfair to say this because it's only in the last like 2 or 3 years that I've really started thinking about this for writing. And I think it's because I've started to teach undergrads and stuff. I didn't do much teaching when I was a grad student. And so as I'm teaching undergrads, like, you know, and you have papers to write and everything, and it's like, and then noticing, man, these papers are so weird because they're like, the actual act of writing this paper for my class is kind of disassociated from what writing is like when you're writing for a journal. And so I kind of like, well, let's try to model what it would actually be like if you were to become grad students and then become, you know, academics, like what writing for a journal would be like, which is, you know, it should be, in my mind, more open. And when you send it for a journal and it gets peer reviewed, hopefully the peer reviewers aren't assholes and they give you really good feedback and everything. But we can model that in the class. We don't have to wait for these unknown people to review our stuff. Why don't we just share our stuff openly? And so, you know, I sort of have this goal now that every new writing that I do is going to be, you know, published online first, at least early draft first, just to get feedback and everything. So it turns out that more of my peers at UW, University of Washington, I think read my stuff, my blog, more so than my gamer friends, or more so than my guild and raid group did. However, to answer that question though, there are like three people maybe who did read the drafts on my blog and gave me feedback, which then fed into the final versions that I submitted to Games and Culture. So and it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't shared. So you know, I do think it's important. And I don't know, I think it's a personal choice too. Not everyone is comfortable with sharing their work, and I understand that, you know, but for me, I just feel like I'm only better if other people look at my stuff while it's in draft form.
Could you talk a little bit about, I know there are several questions that that we've had on our discussion boards that you know, the students in the class that have been kind of discussing, and you were intimately close, I would say, with your guild group and your raid group as you entered before becoming a researcher. And some of the questions that my students have deal with how close is too close to get in research situations. So if you want to address that, that would be pretty awesome. I think they would like to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, when you start studying your friends, at what point do they stop becoming your friends, right? Or at what point do they become people who you start to criticize, or people who they think you're now assessing them? It does get really weird. For the most part, the raid group that I studied were not the main group of people that I played with or that I learned the game with. There was a bit of overlap, but it wasn't exactly the same group. And so, you know, there were like, I don't know, a group of about 60 students. I mean, not students, players, sorry. I'm in this, like, you know, you professor role kind of thing now. But yeah, so of about 60 regular players, I probably feel like I was really good friends with only like maybe 5 of them. And those are the same 5 people who were also in my guild. But for the others, you know, so I guess that just qualifies it a little bit. So I wasn't super close with all of them. But for the people who I was close with, I don't know. It kind of feels like, you know, that book, A Scanner Darkly, from Philip K. Dick. So like, he's like looking at himself. He's analyzing video recordings of himself, and he doesn't even realize it's himself really, because he's also an undercover cop, right? So he's this. Anyways, whatever. But it kind of felt like I could disassociate myself while I was doing the data analysis. And maybe what helped that was just assigning them aliases too. So I did all that up front. I didn't give them aliases after the analysis of that. I did it before the analysis. And so you know, I guess, I mean, I don't know. I mean, in the back of my head, of course, I still knew who they were, right? But the thing is, I think with ethnography, even if somebody, like if you were to write a report on somebody and evaluate them or criticize them, then I'm not sure you're doing ethnography really correctly, because when you do ethnography, I think the most important thing is try to understand the decisions that participants are making from their point of view. And when you do it that way, anything you describe should make sense, you know. And they have a reason for doing the decisions or making the decisions that and doing the actions that they are. And if you don't understand why it is that they're doing something, then you haven't gotten deep enough with their point of view. And so part of it is like when you're writing, if you find that you're criticizing somebody or you're like overly lauding them, then maybe you're not understanding it from their point of view enough. And so I don't know, I kind of feel like when I was writing it that I don't know, I think I did a good job of like trying to understand where they're coming from and everything. Especially in that last chapter, I don't know if you've gotten there yet, but the last chapter that describes the breakup of the group. And I mean, it's just painful. And some of them started hating each other, which is just, you know, like given our history and everything, it's just really painful to watch unfold and really painful to write about. And yet I could see like both sides to the argument, or all sides to the argument. You know, I understood why this guy is saying the things that he's doing, why he's saying, but yeah, I also understand why this guy started the attack in the first place, because he felt jilted and all this other stuff. And it almost becomes like, you know, you start understanding everybody, and you can't really blame anyone for their actions because it all makes sense from where they are. I don't know if what I'm saying is true. Like if you read that chapter, actually, some of the quotes are actually from me, and you know, so obviously when the raid group was breaking up, I felt compelled to say certain things, and so maybe I wasn't being impartial. But yeah, I don't know. Just be mindful, I guess. You know, everyone has to do it on their own and be mindful of their own work. Actually, you know, just to like totally back up, I think research in general is done really, really well. It almost doesn't matter what method, if the person doing it is extremely mindful of how they're doing it. No. Was that a satisfactory answer?
Absolutely. Maybe, I don't know, Gloria, you have a question?
Yes, kind of switching gears a little, but I was interested in the remarks about the design lab and how it was initially focused on undergrad students, and then you mentioned that it kind of expanded to K-12. Would you mind elaborating just a little on the expanding and how that looks in reality?
Yeah. So our original pitch to Pepperdine, so it was me and a graduate student who did this, who pitched this idea. So Pepperdine had an internal grant competition last year called the Ways of Innovation Grant, or Ways of Innovation Award, or whatever. It was offered by the president's office, and it was basically like 70 or 80 different proposals were sent in, and then they picked 8 of us to do a TED talk, TED-inspired talk, which actually was open to the public, but no one came because they didn't publicize it at all. And it was up in Malibu, in a Malibu campus at Pepperdine, so like no one would want to come at all, right? Because it's impossible to get to. But anyway, so I was up on stage. I memorized my script and everything with my co-presenter, former graduate student of mine, who's still a grad student here at Pepperdine. So me and Victoria were up there. We gave a spiel and everything. It was totally awesome. Everyone else didn't really get the TED Talk format, and so we completely blew everyone else out of the water in terms of like won the audience award of an extra $1,500. And the award was supposed to be $150,000 for 1 year as startup money to get this thing going. The president ended up, well, so he was going to give 3 people that much money, and then he ended up giving 6 of us half as much as that money, right? About approximately, it kind of averaged to about half, because some of them he actually did award the full amount, some of them he only gave like $10,000 or something like that. But we ended up getting way less than we asked for. I don't know where I was going with that, but the short of it is the proposal itself was originally sort of a three prong proposal. One was to increase engagement and learning with undergrads through working with faculty to make their courses more game informed, to make the actual activities that they have in their courses take a cue from game mechanics, to make their courses have these, basically interrelated systems, and these decisions that students make in their courses be meaningful and lead to some sort of pathway through their courses. So it isn't just about badges and points and everything, but it's about like making meaningful decisions, I would say, or giving agency to students, just as game designers seek to give agency to players. And so that was one thing that we wanted to do. And the rhetoric around that was all about transforming higher education. I actually hinted at, well, I don't want to stop. I don't want to end with just course redesign, but I think games can help us transform academia in general. And why can't campus life be more, like a game? Well, campus life is a game, first of all, right? But why can't we try to start critiquing and deconstructing the system that is academia through gaming and make it more fun and enjoyable for everyone, more transparent, more user-centered, user-created, and stuff like that. Well, all these things, right? Also, all that rhetoric was bounded in this one prong. It's kind of a lot to throw into this grant proposal for this tiny thing, but that's what our goal was. Additionally, the other 2 parts. One was I want to design these little mini games that focus on moral and ethical reasoning and empathy building. And part of that is because I've been playing games like Depression Quest and just these lovely, like, really small games that probably only took, or could only take, like a week to make or something like that, and yet just have these very powerful messages. And I've grown up playing BioWare games, all these role-playing games with interesting decisions in them, or moral choices in them. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, but I think a lot of that stuff can be stripped down to just those decisions. You don't have to have the 3D combat and everything for some of those decisions to be interesting. So imagine, for example, Mass Effect without anything except for the dialogue. Like, would that work? And if it could you then use it as a vehicle for just exploring, moral gray areas, I guess, and building empathy between you and the NPCs, or you and other players, or whatever. that second prong, the design work, is sort of taking a back burner this first year. Like, I just don't think we have any money or resources to make games. Then the third prong is research, and researching both the efficacy of the first two prongs and also researching, and I actually mentioned this with Hannah before, I have this book idea of writing about sort of esoteric or arcane gaming practices, or like these niche groups of gamers who are doing these incredible things that they had to sort of teach themselves how to do in order to play the game that they want to be playing the way they want to be playing it. And so I want to do research on that, on just these player communities also. I think all that again is sort of taking a back burner to the first thing, which is what we're doing in faculty. But then something that's come in and has sort of replaced it all is this idea of a game jam. When we found out that we had a lot less money than we thought we would, it became clear that one thing we had to focus on is how to make more money and how to attract external funders and get grant money and get endowments and all this other stuff. And so partially we're like, well, what can we do that's relatively easy, that'll be good press, that'll get us good exposure and everything? Well, we should do a game jam. They're in right now, like everyone's doing game jams right now, but we can do it with underserved populations, which is what, like, Pepperdine has this sort of mission to, at least the education department. So I'm working pretty closely with the Graduate School of Education and Psychology, even though the lab that I'm now running is serving all of the campus, not just that school. But that school specifically has, a mission, like most education schools have a mission to serve underserved populations. And so we're just like, well, let's just do a game jam for this group of people, like a splash in LA. I mean, I was kind of surprised, like, when I got here, that no one's doing this already, because LA is so freaking huge, right? And it's like, what's going on here? Why aren't you guys, like, collectively working on making the city totally, totally, totally awesome? And not that they aren't, but I feel like a whole bunch of people in LA are not being served. And so we sort of pivoted, so not only do we want to increase engagement with undergrads and their courses and everything, but now we want to like work with everyone. Like, so I think the very first iteration of the game jam was, oh, let's do a game jam for Pepperdine students in the Pepperdine community. And then when I finally landed in LA, it became pretty clear that LA in general needed, some work. And so, we also, just selfishly, like, doing LA in general is just going to make bigger headlines, and so hopefully will attract more money for us. But that's it's a sort of a new pivot for me, because I've never actually worked with not higher ed, right? There's new things I have to think about, especially homeless. Like, we have to feed them, we have to make sure the venue that we secure is actually accessible. We might have to, like, rent buses. I don't know. There's all this sort of logistics that I like, wow, you don't have to deal with this with undergrads at all, ever. But I don't know if that answered your question, Gloria. It was kind of long-winded, but that's, like, I tend to be pretty long-winded I don't know, I'm verbose. I've been told I should stop being as verbose as I am, but I feel like if more people were more verbose with me, then we would all get along really well.
Thank you. That did answer my question. Very interesting. And yes, logistics would be huge.
Yeah.
Mark, could you explain what a game jam is? Some of my students who might watch this later might not understand the concept behind a game jam.
Yeah, sure. So if you know what a hackathon is, or if you know what a startup weekend is, then it's a very similar sort of idea, except for games specifically. So usually what a traditional game jam in the industry, at least, is a weekend event. It's usually 36 hours or 48 hours. And there's an organization actually called the Global Game Jam. You can look them up. They hold an annual competition every January. And it's basically you're usually you're given some sort of topic or idea or word or theme or something, and then you brainstorm different game ideas based off of that topic. You split up into teams, or maybe you came already with a team that you're going to be working with, and then you try to make an awesome game based off of that theme in the weekend. It's been going on for like, I don't know, probably like a decade now, something like that. But there's been a lot more sort of a push to make them more open and accessible and workable. Not everyone, I mean, it's actually kind of a privilege, mostly of like 20-something-year-olds, to have a weekend that they can just, blow through. People with families, it's difficult to do that sometimes, pulling all-nighters and stuff like that. So there've been a whole bunch of sort of like, I guess, non-traditional game jams, ones where you have set hours, or ones where it's a shorter thing, like it's just a one-day thing or whatever. And there's also been specifically themed game jams. So I think, for example, there was a Halloween one recently. There's a competition every year, I think it's every year, called Ludum Dare. And it's like, instead of, so usually when I think of a game jam, I think of people going to a location and sharing the space, and then like just making a game in that space, kind of like a maker space. But Ludum Dare, I think, is an online specifically type of competition. So you could be anywhere in the world, and you could be, in your apartment or whatever, and you make a game, and then you submit it, and you basically submit it online. So there's a whole bunch of different formats for it now, but the way we're thinking of it is probably a Saturday, Sunday thing with like maybe 5 hours for each day or something like that. And leading up to it will be a couple of pre-workshops for maybe the 2 weekends beforehand. And that's where we're going to bring in these mentors for whoever wants to participate in the jam, so that on the weekend of, like, they're not expected to make a game, like without knowing anything. And so we have these workshops leading up to it, like, so these are some basics about what game design is like, and what you should be thinking about, how you can think about, mechanics or narrative or whatever. We don't know exactly what's going to happen on those workshops yet. And a lot of it will be sort of dictated by what kinds of games we want the kids to be making. So one idea is these twine games, right? I already mentioned that. But another idea is maybe we just do a board game or a card game type of thing. So then we don't even need any sort of technology resources. Which is another thing. Like, usually in a game jam, people bring their own laptops and stuff like that. And that can't happen here, right? So a board game idea or a board game jam might be just more doable, right? And it depends on if I can get the tech donated or whatever. Yeah, so that's, I don't know, I guess. There's like a lot, most urban areas most big urban areas have their own sort of indie game collective that hold like monthly game jams. So I know Seattle and Portland has one. I'm pretty sure LA, or maybe not game jams, but like places where you can go and like just meet up with people and make games. You know.
Thank you. Does anybody have any additional questions?
Okay, so I have a totally random question. I'm more and more watching my 8-year-old learn to play games on his own. And as I do that, I'm increasingly fascinated by studying him and how ethical, unethical, borderline ethical is that, I guess is my question.
PIJ studied his own kids.
Yeah, it has a pretty strong history in psychology. The danger is your biases, right? Like, you can't assume that what you find with your kid is going to be able to generalize to a whole bunch of other kids necessarily. I mean, maybe it does, or maybe, and maybe you're not even worried about that. I mean, usually, ethnography isn't really worried about generalization. It's more worried about shedding light on the human condition, I think. And you could do that with a single subject. But you know, a good ethnography, I don't know. So there's this, it's all this paradoxes, right? Or like, you want to make what's exceptional seem totally mundane, and you want to make whatever seems mundane totally exceptional. Is like the job of an ethnographer, and so. Again, I think if you're mindful of what you're doing and you try not to let your sort of preconceived notions about your son like bleed into your interpretation of what he's doing, then maybe that's fine. Would you, I don't know, single subject study, like, is that an ethnography? Is a good question. Are you going to be setting up certain situations, or are you just going to be watching what naturally occurs?
I mean, I haven't really thought that much of it. I would assume, knowing the way I work, that it would be just watch what happens rather than set situations.
And then are you going to, I mean, it's totally different than what I did, right? So you would be able to ask questions, which I didn't get. I never got IRB to approve me asking questions of my participants. So I never actually did interviews with my participants. So it's all observational data. You would presumably be able to ask your kid questions. Does that help or hurt? I don't know. And I should also probably just say that I don't feel like I'm an expert in ethnographic methods, even though I've now written a book on it, right? So like in the book, I'm like, this is what I did. It's ethnography, but I'm not sure this is actually the best way of doing it, or like how you should be doing it, or but I think the most important thing is try to understand it from his point of view, and then explain that to other people. If you could get him to, maybe he could be the auto ethnographer, and all you're doing is documenting what he's saying. I don't know. What kinds of games is he playing?
He plays Minecraft. He plays Skylanders. He plays anything related to soccer. Um, just about anything he can get his hands on, he will try. That I'll let that I'll let him play. He's currently trying to get me to let him play Call of Duty, and I haven't let him do that yet.
Mm-hmm. Do you play these games with him?
I have. Right now, he currently has a PlayStation 3 with one controller, so I'm just watching a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But on other systems, yeah, we played a lot together.
Do you know enough about the games that you know that you have an informed idea of what types of decisions he's making in the moment?
Many of them. Some of them, no.
So, because I do think it's pretty important for the researcher to participate. Well, I mean, again, I wasn't able to do interviews, which is why it was doubly important for me to be a participant, so that I knew what it was like to be in this raid group, because I was in the raid group. You have the advantage of being able to ask him questions. Whether he's actually completely lucid at 8, I have no idea, but it would probably be better if you could also play with him too, so that sometimes participants just aren't very good. Even adult participants aren't very good at explaining what they're doing,
right?
Or even being able to explain why they did the things that they're doing. This happens all the time, actually. When you ask teens, why'd you do something? I don't know, right?
Okay. Well, that was my random thought.
Video recording would probably be useful too, and doing video analysis, interaction analysis, so you can see gestures and gaze and things like that. Do you know the work of Reed Stevens?
I don't know if he heard you.
Oh.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so Reed Stevens, he's a professor at Northwestern. He used to be at UW, and he does primarily video interaction analysis. So if you look up some of his work,
okay.
A lot of my book was sort of informed by him too. He's the one who pointed me initially to actor network theory and these more science technology studies way of looking at things.
Jared, too, if you're thinking of doing that, you could do some, if you're looking at your son and doing what Mark was saying with the recording, you could also do some stimulated recall with the recording of the videos and then have him walk back through it with you.
Okay.
Right. And actually, I would probably argue that's more useful than having him talk in the moment. It's very difficult to play games and talk about them at the same time.
And like I say, I don't know how much I've really thought about it, other than the fact that taking these courses and watching him, things are falling together for me, and it just becomes fascinating because I'm, kind of invested in my son. That it becomes interesting, even if for no other reason than a better way to know him.
Yeah.
So.
Does he have any friends that come over, or that that he plays with? Because sometimes that can be, if you have a referral sampling scheme, that can sometimes be easier to get through IRBs as well.
Yeah, he when he plays, he tends to play. His cousins will come over, or he'll play with them. But he has one cousin that he plays with online. So they play primarily Minecraft online. So.
When you record, if you do record, it would, like the way I would do it is record the screen and record him at the same time.
Okay.
You know, because then you can see what's happening on the screen and relate it to what he's doing in the room. I mean, maybe there's a break in the play because he had to go to the bathroom. You know, it isn't actually because he's stuck somewhere, right?
Right.
Things like that.
Okay.
Right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Mark, so much for talking with us. It was absolutely enlightening, and I know that the students that didn't get to watch missed out, but we did record it, so they can watch it later.
Okay.
So we appreciate you taking your time tonight to talk with us. So thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you.
And anyone should feel free to email me if you have more questions.
Fabulous.